Excellencies, Minister Fasslabend, Dr. Zinkanell, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you here at the Diplomatic Academy. This is a place where we discuss European issues very strongly, and it's a pleasure to have today for his talk the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, Mr. POPεπτOI, with us. Welcome at the Diplomatic Academy. It's something actually where I should say congratulations to Moldova and to you, because next week there will be the opening intergovernmental conference for the start of the negotiations for the membership of the European Union, and that is something which is a step. We discussed it beforehand. You said there have been already many green lights, so you want maybe to see the aim, the objective. This will take some time, as we all know, but it's good that we made this firm commitment. And also within the European Union, it was not so easy to get to this point. As you are very familiar, these issues, sometimes parliaments have problems, sometimes prime ministers have problems with things like that in the European Union. But this will be our common problem in the future, that we have to find unanimity actually there. I remember the last time we had a statesperson from your country here was President Maya Sandu. She was here in October 21, and she gave a very energetic speech about Europe also here, as she is an energetic person. But this was the very moment when Gazprom had announced that they would shut up with sending any sort of gas to Moldova, and she was communicating almost during her speech with Ms. van der Leyen at the same time, and the solution was found after all, but this is one of these big difficult issues that you have. And let me say why I think it's the right moment that we ask you, and actually the IES, as our partner, to ask you to give a speech about the European Union path. It's because of what's happening. What's happening in Europe, and I'm talking now certainly about the security situation because of the Russian war of aggression. As we all know, Russia is not only confined to the war on the battlefield, they are also trying to gain influence in other countries within Europe. And this is actually it is a fight over whether we should allow that there are political spheres of influence by the big powers as Russia sees fit in some parts of Europe. You have Europe and the European Union on your side. I always say Europe, and I mean Europe, not the European Union only, although I have to say when I was talking in the last few years always about Europe, the European Union always thought, that's it, European Union, that's us. And Europe is interesting, but it's different from the European Union. We shouldn't allow this. This is also certainly Austria is in favor of saying there is a European idea which goes beyond the present confines of the European Union, and we shouldn't allow spheres of influence that exist at this very moment in the minds of the Kremlin or in the minds possibly also of other countries. You are on the way, as I know, for presidential elections and for a referendum on the EU integration path. The latest figures that I got shows that you are in a good way, 54% for EU accession, possibly 28% against. Maybe the figures are already dated, but this is a strong majority for the time being, and I think this is the right move to ask the population now that the decision has been taken on the European Union side. Maybe my last word of introduction is a critical one about a book or an article you wrote, Minister. You wrote an article about that Moldova has to break with the past. It's our experience that the future does not need a break with the past, but coming to grips with the past. and trying to integrate all levels of history. And I know, as an Austrian, I not personally know it, but I know how difficult it was for the generation before us, before me, to come to grips with the Second World War and the way forward. How should we deal with the past? It took us a long time, and it took us, as I know, in the Central European region, quite a long time after 1989 to come to grips with the past. But actually, breaking with the past is a recipe for disaster. One should integrate as much as possible. I do understand you wrote this not as a politician, that was before. You wrote it as an analyst. As an analyst, I fully agree that one has to discuss these things, but I'm sure as a politician you understand that the future sort of needs also to deal with the past in a way which brings on board as many people in your country and in Europe as possible. We all know how difficult this is because of the communist times that we experienced, and you experienced especially for a long period. But I think the way forward is actually also talking about problems of the past. But this is actually the only thing where I would say possibly it is good also to try, even in difficult situations, to find a way forward dealing with the past. It's a real pleasure to have you here for the first time. Wishing you all the best and your party for the upcoming presidential elections, and welcome again from my side to the Vienna School of International Studies. Thank you.
Dear Mr. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, I also want to say a few words of welcome to all of you, and I especially want to express my gratitude and my pleasure that you came here, because in your political or professional career, as far as I know, you started as a political analyst. And yeah, you performed in a way that brought you right at the top of foreign policy of your country. For me, it's a great pleasure also to welcome a few people from here, because, you know, usually we do not start an event at 2 o'clock right afternoon. Usually we do it only at 6 o'clock. And insofar, I really have to say that there was quite some interest. We have more than 70 people who tried to come here. Not everybody has reached us yet, okay, but this is, I guess, probably normal. Maybe some even will come. But it's my special pleasure, of course, also to welcome your ambassador. We are cooperating with her in an excellent way. I really want to thank her. And of course also quite some ambassadors from the Austrian side. I have on my list also Gerhard Seiler. I have not seen him yet, but Johannes Eigner, of course. Meyer Harting is an absolute must when we talk about Moldova. Klaus Wölfer, Jakob Forst Battaglia, but also General Weber and some others. It's also a pleasure for me to welcome the new president of Pan-Europa movement, Reinhard Kluczek, yeah, and of course a few others like Georg Krauchenberg, Peter Haider, Professor Michailovic, Asfar Rator, and others. This is not a complete list, it's just shall show you also that there's quite some interest not only from the diplomatic side, but from the whole diplomatic community in Austria. Maybe a few words from my side also to the geostrategic situation. If we look back in history, you can see that this piece of land between the Carpathian region and the Black Sea always used to be more or less an entrance door or also an outgoing door. On the one hand, for Greeks and Romans, Byzantine or Ottoman people, at the other side also for peoples that came from Central Asia and from Eastern Europe. And insofar, it always had an enormous strategic position. We can talk a little bit about it from the Austrian position, because due to our history, our borders were not so far away from Moldova in the past, and insofar we learned a lot. Now, of course, this situation, or the situation of your country, has become once more not only highly interesting, but maybe even somehow decisive for the whole of Europe, at least for the stability of southeastern Europe, due to the fact that the war in Ukraine, of course, will decide whether Moscow's influence will reach until the Danube River or not. And the question that everybody is asking in such a case is, of course, what will happen afterwards? What will happen to the relationship of southeastern European countries and Moscow? And insofar, your fate is of highest importance for all of us. Therefore, we really are interested in strengthening our relationships, and not only due to the geostrategic situation, but also to the fact that we are convinced that every nation in Europe has the right to decide itself which way it wants to go. And if you ask me, I mean, due to my analysis, Moldova always used to be part of southeastern Europe, very close to Central Europe. And insofar, I think there should be not a big discussion about it, even when there were periods in history that it looked maybe in a different way. And insofar, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. And now I want to ask you personally to take the floor, and afterwards we will have a discussion that is moderated by Magister Zinkanell, the director of our institute. Please, Ambassador, you will, yes, please, you speak a few words, and then the minister will come. Please.
Thank you so much. Very much. I prepared my small statement in two languages, actually, in German and English, and I will start with the German. And sehr geehrter Herr Botschafter Brix, sehr geehrter Herr Bundesminister außer Dienst, Werner Fasslabend, Exzellenzen, meine Damen und Herren, es ist mir eine besondere Ehre, heute in den Räumlichkeiten der Diplomatischen Akademie wieder zu sein und Sie bei unserer Veranstaltung begrüßen zu dürfen. In den letzten 2 Jahren haben wir eine enge Zusammenarbeit entwickelt und darauf freue ich mich sehr. Und für die wundervolle Gastfreundschaft möchte ich mich bei Ihnen ganz, ganz herzlich bedanken. Ein besonderes Dankeschön möchte ich auch an Herrn Werner Fasslabend, der Bundesminister, aber gleichzeitig auch Vorsitzender des Instituts für Europa- und Sicherheitspolitik und sein Team ausdrücken. Ich freue mich, dass unser Treffen und unser intensiver Meinungsaustausch fruchtbar sein konnten. Und heute sind wir zusammen schon mit der Teilnahme des Ministers für Auswärtige Angelegenheiten der Republik Moldau, Herrn Mihai POPftOI, um über die Herausforderungen zu sprechen, mit denen sich die Republik Moldau konfrontiert, aber auch über die Chancen und Perspektiven unseres Landes, ein Teil der großen europäischen Familie zu werden. So, ladies and gentlemen, June has a special significance and importance, both for my country and Austria, and I would like to reflect a little bit on that. In June 2022, Moldova became a candidate country for accession to the European Union. 2 years later, also in June 2024, EU agrees in principle on starting accession talks for Moldova and Ukraine. And in a week, next week, on June 25, 2024, the Belgian presidency will call the first intergovernmental conference. It was a tireless work, but this will be a crucial step for the European future of both countries. We can only become truly strong and defend our citizens in the family of the European countries. And Moldova can ensure the well-being of its citizens by implementing the European development model that values freedom, honesty, work, and respect for the rules. European integration means concrete things that each of us feels. And now let's look back to Austria's experience. On June 12, 1994, a groundbreaking referendum was held in Austria in which 2/3 of the population voted in favor of joining the European Union. Numerous Austrian political actors emphasized the importance of this historic decision. Integration into the European single market has enabled the Austrian economy to grow by an average of 0.7% per year. So this economic dynamism has contributed to the creation of jobs and increased prosperity in Austria. This decision laid the foundation for a new era of economic, political, and social integration of Austria in Europe. After 30 years, Austria is still a powerful and inspiring example for my country. Meine Damen und Herren, Österreich war immer ein Fürsprecher für die EU-Beitrittsbemühungen meines Landes. Und ich freue mich, dass die moldawisch-österreichischen Beziehungen ausgezeichnet sind. In den 31 Jahren seit der Aufnahme der diplomatischen Beziehungen zwischen der Republik Moldau und der Republik Österreich befinden sie sich in einem Prozess der kontinuierlichen Weiterentwicklung. Und heute besteht zwischen beiden Ländern eine umfassende, eine enge Verbindung. Es gibt einen intensiven politischen Dialog auf allen Ebenen, von Bundespräsidenten abwärts. Darüber hinaus engagieren wir uns beide für Förderung des bilateralen Handels und Investitionen, der Beziehungen im landwirtschaftlichen Bereich, im Tourismus, in der Kultur sowie im akademischen Bereich. In der Entwicklungszusammenarbeit gibt es ebenfalls sehr gute Beziehungen. Die Austrian Development Agency setzt derzeit 14 Projekte allein in unserem Land um, nicht nur in der Hauptstadt, aber auch im ländlichen Raum. Österreich hat viel Erfahrung in unterschiedlichen Bereichen. Wenn wir diese Erfahrung nutzen können, profitieren davon nämlich unsere Bürger und Bürgerinnen. Und es ist entscheidend, dass die Menschen diese Arbeit merken. Meine Damen und Herren, der brutale und ungerechtfertigte russische Krieg gegen die Ukraine hat vieles geändert. Für mein Land ist der EU-Kandidatenstatus sowohl ein neues Kapitel als auch eine historische Chance, ein solides, demokratisches, wohlhabendes und widerstandsfähiges Land aufzubauen, aber auch ein engagiertes Mitglied einer Gemeinschaft zu werden, der die gleichen europäischen Werte teilt. Moldau steht derzeit an einem Scheideweg und es ist von entscheidender Bedeutung, auf dem gleichen Weg zusammenzuhalten. Zum Schluss möchte ich mich bei Ihnen ganz herzlich noch einmal bedanken. Ich wünsche Ihnen ganz interessante Diskussionen und ich danke sehr für Ihre Aufmerksamkeit.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear excellencies, it is my great pleasure to also welcome you on behalf again of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and again to welcome you to today's discussion with Moldova's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Vice Primary Minister Mihai POPεπτOI. Mr. POPεπτOI, please join me right away on the stage as we begin our discussion. I'd like to thank especially Ambassador Mocanu for your introductory words, Mr. Brix, Ambassador Brix for yours as well, and of course Mr. Fasslabend too. Based on that, we will build this discussion today on Moldova's path towards the EU. But before we go and talk about Moldova's path to the EU, may I introduce to all of you this gentleman's personal path to the position that he holds currently. Mihai POPεπτOI has an outstanding academic career and international academic background. You have studied your PhD in political studies at the University of Milan in Italy. You have a master's degree in public policy from the Central European University, and where you've been studying in Hungary and in the UK, and a bachelor and master degree also in political science from Moldova State University. And it has been mentioned already briefly that you previously, in your previous professional life, have worked also as a political analyst, as a public policy consultant for various think tanks, for various institutions in the UK, in the US, in Romania, and of course being a think tank ourselves, we very much appreciate that a man from the field, from the political consultancy, has risen through the ranks politically as well. You have held in the past couple of years various prestigious positions as a member, an active member of the Action and Solidarity Party in Moldova, the party that was founded by the current president of Moldova, Maia Sandu. Amongst others, you have been member of parliament, member of the Foreign Policy and European Integration Committee, and also vice president of the Parliamentary Assembly for the Council of Europe, fraction leader, deputy speaker, and now deputy prime minister and minister of foreign affairs since this year. And as it has been mentioned already before, especially by Ambassador Mocanu, the path towards the European Union, it has already started. It has already begun. We have already heard about several green lights that have been passed in this process. The path has started at least when Moldova officially applied for EU membership, just a few weeks after the Russian full-fledged invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Then in June 22, the EU Commission, as mentioned, granted and recommended the candidate ascendance status, which was afterwards granted by the Council as well. In November 23, there was another milestone. The Commission recommended to open the accession negotiations, which again, as procedure requires, then was again decided by the Council in December 23. And in this lengthy process, the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks have been very decisive, especially this month, as mentioned before, was very sufficient. We have heard already that the EU Commission has pushed member states to open the official process with Moldova, with Ukraine, and that 27 member states have officially agreed that Moldova completed the necessary reforms to start this process. And just 4 days ago on Friday, the EU ambassadors also have basically agreed on the negotiation framework. The Belgian presidency has just called also for the first intergovernmental conferences, which will be held on 25th of June, which will mark the official start of the accession. Just to give you a small background, and all that, of course, also against the background that the Russian aggressions in Ukraine have also spilled over to Moldova. We can probably talk about that also later, but most importantly also that Moldova is per capita the country that has taken in most Ukrainian refugees over the last couple of years as well. So without further ado, I'd like to end my introduction and hand over to you, Minister, to probably give us your introductory remarks as well on Moldova's path to EU. Where do you see challenges? Where do you see obstacles? But especially, how do you see the next couple of months in terms of the perspectives that we can all hope for and look for? Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm really pleased, and thank you, the hosts, for welcoming me. The Republic of Moldova continues to defy the odds in circumstances that we would not wish upon anyone. But despite these enormous challenges, Moldova is not just muddling through, but it's actually reaching meaningful progress, be it in energy security, be it in justice reform, be it in combating disinformation and consolidating its institutions and its sovereignty, and perhaps most consequential, it is achieving meaningful progress on its ambition, on the legitimate craving of our citizens to be members of the European Union. And no matter how hard the Kremlin is trying to hold us back, to hold us hostages to our history, our geography, we will not be deterred. And thanks to the support of our citizens and the support of the international community, Moldova has reached significant progress. Because if you would have told me 3 years ago that Moldova, in a short period of time, will no longer be dependent on Gazprom for gas, I would tell you that this is impossible. Because the European Union was nudging Moldova to unbundle its energy sector for over a decade now. It was just so difficult, and politicians kept kicking the can down the road. Well, now that is done. Now we're in the process of building high voltage lines to connect ourselves to the Romanian energy grid, that is the European energy grid. So we are no longer ever put in the position that we were 2 years ago. When the Russians pushed us with the back against the wall, we had absolutely no alternative for gas and electricity. The prices went up 500%. And the Kremlin counted that we are going to buckle, that we are going to fail, just like they counted on Ukraine failing in 3 days. But let's be honest, not just the Russians counted on Ukraine failing in 3 days. Many of us in the international community were not giving enough credit to Ukraine's capacity to resist, but they did. And they continue to resist and keeping not just themselves safe, but also Moldova safe. And we, in turn, will do our utmost to help Ukraine. As Michael mentioned, we did provide and welcomed the largest number of refugees per capita. We opened our education system, healthcare system, labor market. We provide everything we possibly can from our modest means. We provided the solidarity lanes for Ukraine's exports and imports when the Black Sea was blocked. We provide humanitarian aid, anything and everything we can possibly do, because we know for a fact, and this is not at all abstract to us, that Ukraine's capacity to resist is something that keeps Moldova safe. And the anxiety that Moldovans are going through is incomparable to the suffering and horror that Ukraine is going through every day. Just 2 days ago, I was in Odessa, and I cannot be more in awe with the courage and the determination of the Ukrainian people to stand up for their territory, for their kids' future, and the fact that we are also able to move onto the European integration path, it's only a testament to this determination. But again, in Moldova, we didn't just wait and hope that things improve. We took action, and just like a few years ago, it felt impossible that Moldova was, it seemed like it was going in the wrong direction. An oligarch was controlling the country with an iron grip. Democracy was failing. Democratic institutions were being hollowed out. The $1 billion was stolen from the Moldovan banking system, 12% of GDP. It felt like Moldova's future is doomed. But you had a person that was formerly a minister of education that built strong political capital on combating corruption in the education system. They created a small team of young people, and the oligarch really made us a favor by not taking us seriously. He was calling us backpackers, hipsters. He felt like we were not a threat to his grip on power in Moldova. Well, he is no longer in power, needless to say. The de-oligarchization in Moldova is finished. We have no more oligarchs in Moldova. But we certainly need to work harder to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where Moldovans feel like the oligarchs spending the money that they stole from the Moldovan citizens, spending this money to destabilize the country and to undermine Moldova's European future is nothing short of adding insult to injury. We are working hard now not just to consolidate our democratic and rule of law institutions, but also we are working hard with our partners to not allow this feeling of impunity that some of these oligarchs have enjoyed. Like Ilan Shor, who spent quite some time in Israel, and we've been begging, for lack of a diplomatic term, our friends in Israel to extradite him, or at least to convict him and imprison him in Israel. because he was convicted to 15 years in prison in Moldova by the Court of Appeals for the billion-dollar fraud. Didn't quite work out. Now he's in Russia, feels a sense of impunity, and is using the very cash that he stole and infinitely more that the Kremlin is more than happy to provide to destabilize Moldova, to cause trouble, to undermine Moldova's sovereignty and Moldova's European path. The same goes for Plahotniuc, the other oligarch, who is allegedly in northern Cyprus, sanctioned by the international community, but also Moldovan justice system is struggling to make sure that even if the money that was stolen from our citizens is not recuperated, at least the culprits of these heinous crimes that have left Moldovans poorer than they already were, at least they would be brought to justice. But the international sanctions regime is doing its job. Just the other day, the Bashkan, the governor of the Gaguz autonomy, that bought her way into the position with the money from the oligarch, was sanctioned by the United States, and will continue to work with our partners to not allow this sense of impunity to these oligarchs. So Moldova is progressing, and no matter how hard the Kremlin will try to hold us back, we'll continue to double down on the democratic reforms, on the efforts to combat corruption in Moldova. And just the last 2 years, we improved 40 positions in the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index. It's not something that I can really run on and be exactly very proud of, because we are still 76 in the world, but we were 100-something. 40 positions improvement is significant, but there is still a lot more work to do. But there are some statistics that we are doing even better, and we are doing better than some EU member states when it comes to women participation in politics, women empowerment. We are 26 in the world, better than some EU member states. And there was a time recently when I was deputy speaker, and I was joking with my colleague, Speaker Grosso, that he was the odd one out, because we had a woman president, a woman prime minister, a woman chairwoman of the Constitutional Court, now we have 40% of women in parliament. And that's also a statistic that puts to shame many other countries. And I'm telling my friends from the Nordic countries that we are coming after them. We'll not rest till we have actual gender parity in parliament. And we've improved significantly the conditions so that all of our citizens can participate in the political process, in the economic system, so that we can tap on the resources of every single citizen. And we've been generously supported by the international community. And I'd like to thank Austria and European Union for helping us in these challenging times. And my message is that no matter how much gratitude we feel for the aid that we receive, we are really looking forward to investments. And now we are working with our partners to create a mechanism to guarantee foreign direct investment in Moldova, be it Austrian, be it German, be it American, a mechanism that is working in Ukraine, because without this guarantee mechanism, for now, when the war is ravaging nearby, it's going to be very difficult to make a case to private investors to venture in Moldova with the war being just a couple 100 miles away. But we are doing our utmost in Moldova to make sure that we're improving the business climate, that we're improving the rule of law system, so that we can advance not just on the European path, but also create the proper conditions for economic development. Because that is what we have promised to our citizens, and that is what we are committed to delivering.
Minister. Minister POPεπτOI, thank you very much for these inspiring remarks. You have already mentioned and touched upon also, of course, the Russian influence. We will go into these details, but first of all, allow me please to address a question more on the technicalities, on the expectations for the continuation of the process of EU accession, especially when it comes to the negotiation framework, which is going to determine the exact path and how it's outlined, the path of EU enlargement, the road ahead. And you have also already mentioned that Ms. Sandu has pledged that Moldova will become a full-fledged member of the EU. And I suppose the expectation that she has brought forth, the time frame was by 2030. So from your perspective, what are the most decisive criteria that you expect now, especially when it comes to the negotiation framework? What are the nitty-gritty details that will be of utmost importance?
Well, first and foremost, as a politician, I would like Moldova to be a member of the EU tomorrow. As an academic, I know that the accession process is supposed to be long for a reason. And my PhD was on the disconnect of democratization and Europeanization in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And not just as an academic, but as a citizen of Moldova and someone who is familiar close with the developments in Ukraine and Georgia, you need to have the proper guardrails in place. And there is no better guardrails for democratic consolidation than the EU accession process. Of course, we would benefit a lot from a speedier accession, but we have cases where accession process did not guarantee that democracy remains consolidated. We don't want to end up in a situation where the hard-earned achievements of democracy taking root in Moldova being undone in a short period of time, or democracy unraveling by it not being consolidated enough. So we will take our time. We're not asking for any shortcuts. We know that we will need to carry out all the difficult reforms, and there is no way to sugarcoat it. One of the #1 challenges for Moldova is justice reform and combating corruption. Yes, we have a number of challenges across the board. If you look now on the statistics of Moldova's efforts in harmonizing our legislation in different sectors, in some we are a little better, in some we are worse, in some we are, I shouldn't probably go there, it's more than worse. We need to work hard to catch up in some sectors more than others, but the cornerstone effort of our accession process will be justice reform. Mm-hmm. But even before having a glimpse of hope of EU accession, our ultimate commitment in the previous election, President Sandu landslide victory in 2020, our landslide victory in 2021 in the parliamentary election, even before we had the slightest hope of actually joining the EU, our main commitment, if you want, our political DNA is justice reform. Because without a properly functioning judiciary, I won't be able to convince a foreign investor. Mm-hmm. I won't be able to convince even Moldovans who have hard-earned capital, be it at home or abroad. I won't be able to convince them to come into Moldova. So the #1 challenge is justice reform. And we're already seeing significant progress. The Supreme Council of Magistracy has been vetted. The Supreme Council of Prosecutors has been vetted. Now, these external evaluation commissions with experienced judges from the Netherlands, US, Italy, and together with Moldovan experts are vetting the Moldovan justice system. And they're going now through the Supreme Court. Some of the most corrupt judges from the system already left, not wanting to be vetted because they realize that there is no hope for them to pass the vetting. The same now is going for the prosecutors. Just last week, we had 9 prosecutors from the anti-corruption prosecutorial body, which is highly ironic because we have a history of the anti-corruption institution being somewhat corrupt, let's put it diplomatically. So now, 9 prosecutors from this body stepped down exactly because they didn't want to be vetted, because they realized there is no hope for them to pass the vetting. This is a testament to the quality of the vetting process, and we are encouraged by these initial results. We are about halfway through the reform, and we will see it finished, because without justice reform bearing fruit for the citizens, for the country, all the others are somewhat secondary. Of course, the security considerations are very important. The developments on the front line in Ukraine cannot be ignored. It's the proverbial elephant in the room. Mm-hmm. The Russian military presence in the Transnistrian region is another complicated discussion. But domestically, the one that we have significant leverage over is the reform of the judiciary, and also providing the economic preconditions to kickstart the economy so that we can deliver to our citizens. And the rest, the capacity shortcomings in other sectors, we are very encouraged by the support of our international partners that are helping us with experts, with capacity building, so that we can overcome some of those other shortcomings.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have talked mainly about the milestones that are happening on the EU level, especially now. The one that was mentioned, the 25th of June, the next upcoming milestone. However, a milestone for the entire process of EU accession that lies in the hands of the Moldovan people is the 20th of October this year, when you'll have not only a referendum on the EU membership, on the constitution, but also the presidential elections. And I've taken a brief look at the most updated polls. The polls say that the approval rate for EU membership, as mentioned already before briefly, were roughly 60 or over 60%, 65%, and President Sandu's approval rate is also currently roughly around 40, 45, 46%. What is your outlook? What is the expectation that you can give us for the 20th of October, especially vis-a-vis potential disruptions from Russia that are already now expected?
Well, again, as a politician, I have to be very optimistic. I cannot afford to be pessimistic. But my analyst hat suggests that we cannot take anything for granted. Things can shift fast. In a democratic, competitive process like the one in Moldova, and the extra caveat of Russian foreign interference, and the amount of Russian proxies that are more than willing to do the Russian bidding in Moldova, the numbers do not seem ones that would give us a lot of confidence. 55% is good. With the extra 10% from the diaspora, it's roughly 60-65%. But that's still not a number that we can pump our chest and be overly confident about. On the presidential election, things again, we are cautiously optimistic. President Sandu is by far the front runner. We are seeing now this stampede on the pro-Russian side. A number of proxies of the Kremlin are trying to outcompete each other in kissing the ring and going to Kremlin and promising to sell their soul like they have been for quite some time. And the citizens will have to judge. We, of course, from our side are looking at the numbers and in the democratic process, we hope to win, of course, in the first round. If not, we'll contend with whoever gets the largest number of votes in the second round. But it's going to be tough. The Russians are not sparing resources in funneling cash into the country to bribe voters, to create all sorts of fake news, to undermine our democratic process. But we have to be more resilient. We try to be proactive in informing our citizens about what is at stake and what the risks are. And we'll continue to work hard to reach out to every single voter, because we've had a troubling history in Moldova where a large number of our citizens, especially ethnic communities, Russian speakers, have been left on a silver platter for the Russians to exploit. The pro-European center-right parties have not done enough to work with the ethnic communities. We're trying now to remedy that shortcoming. And we'll continue to do that, because every single vote is important. And we are now in the starting of this big communication campaign, because sometimes it's painful to witness when in a region, for instance, Gagauzia, but it's also true in other regions that have benefited from so much European assistance, taking their kids to a kindergarten that was built with Romanian public funds, walking on a road that was built with Turkish taxpayer money, working on a small enterprise that was opened with the European or American funds, but voting for the Kremlin and praying to Putin like he's the Lord and Savior, because this assistance was not internalized. The fact that there is so much support coming to these communities usually doesn't register, because Russian propaganda, 10K spent by the Russians on propaganda usually undo $1 million or more that EU spends or US spends on infrastructure. So we need to be a lot more proactive, a lot more effective in our communication in reaching these often hard to reach audiences that don't speak the official language or speak it poorly, that are not necessarily engaged in the public discourse. But we need to reach out to them, because otherwise we feed this feeling of alienation, this ghetto mentality that the Kremlin is so instrumental in exploiting. So we know what we need to do. It's the hard part is actually delivering and executing on that.
I find it very reassuring and refreshing that you can talk both from your political and from your analytical perspective, having a think tanker's mind in the body of a politician, and combining those two aspects perfectly. So allow me to pick your analytical brain just a little bit more, especially when we talk about this unprecedented rise also of Russian influence and Russian interference that you have experienced over the last 2.5 years in particular, especially with the rise ever since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I have read a couple of analyses that when it comes to the information warfare, when it comes to disinformation, apparently the narrative at the moment favors Russia in the information war, not the Moldovan narrative. So knowing that these Russian hybrid forms of influence are trying to destabilize the society, are trying to stir away from the path towards EU integration, towards EU accession, what is your assessment of the current Russian influence?
Well, it's certainly picking up pace, but its effectiveness, it's a testament to lack of political will of Moldovan political class for the past 30 years that have allowed the Moldovan citizens to live in this Russian propaganda environment. So the ground is fertile for them to exploit. That's why these tactics are so effective. But the reason that is the case goes back to the question that Ambassador Brix raised with Moldova not breaking or breaking from the past. It is exactly that we have not broken from the past in a geopolitical sense, because you cannot escape geography, you cannot escape history, but you can, and I would argue should, escape geopolitics and influence, a nefarious influence, because we have no problem with having good business relations with Russia. We have no problem having good cultural relations with Russia. But we have a big problem with the Russians purposefully and the Kremlin denying our sovereignty, undermining our territorial integrity by maintaining troops and munitions in the Transnistrian region, and sabotaging our democratic process. So by breaking away with the past, this is meant in a geopolitical sense, because, and in a political sense perhaps, because more often than not, we have this musical chairs in elections and election cycles where you have a pro-European, pro-democracy force winning, and then you have a pro-Russian anti-democratic force winning. And then you have a lot of the efforts that are being done are being undone. So breaking with the past is more with breaking with this mold of not having a clear trajectory of development that is consistent, that is irreversible. And now we are trying to make it the case by doing away and exiting the community of independent states, which is an oxymoron because it's not much of a community and certainly very little independence allowed to its members. So now we are meaningfully breaking with our past in a geopolitical sense. When it comes to our dependence on Russian energy, we are also breaking those ties that were holding us hostage, much like many other countries in Europe. So that is our determination to break with those bonds that were keeping us in this dependency on Russia. And that is very much true when it comes to media. Because you've had this incredibly cynical situation where Moldovan politicians, Plahotniuc and others before him, owned the rebroadcasting rights of Russian federal TV stations, rebroadcasting and indoctrinating Moldovan citizens with Russian propaganda. And a nominally pro-European politician like Plahotniuc pretending to be was earning handsomely from this rebroadcasting rights while indoctrinating its citizens with Russian propaganda. Now we've done away with the Russian federal TV stations, but the damage is severe. And now, of course, through online, it's very difficult. We are building now this strategic communication center that hopefully will be able to help us better navigate this Russian nefarious influence online. But of course, we have to make sure that we remain firmly within the democratic guardrails that I mentioned earlier. We cannot afford to play the Russian playbook. We have committed and we're determined to provide our citizens the standards that they expect when it comes to democratic freedoms, freedom of media, freedom of expression. It actually took us a year of the war in internal decision-making. Should we cut off Russian propaganda in Moldova, Russian federal TV channels or not? What our citizens are going to say, what Brussels is going to say, what Strasbourg is going to say. And then in December, after a year of the war, the EU shut down Russia Today. And we figured if it's good for Europe, it's good for us. And we shut down Russian federal TV stations, something that we should have done a long time ago, decades ago. But instead, we've had political elites that were benefiting materially from this indoctrination. And the same goes for energy security. We had political leaders that had a disincentive from diversifying Moldova's energy contracts because they had corrupt interest in maintaining those contracts, be it with Russia or with Kuchurgan power plant in Transnistrian region of Moldova. Thankfully, now that is behind us. Now we have clear, transparent contracts. We are connecting ourselves to the European energy grid where everything is clear. The price, the services are economy-based, not political strings attached, as we had with Russia with the subsequent embargoes that we faced. But then again, there is always a silver lining, even in the worst crises. With the Russian embargo on Moldovan wine sector, it ended up being a blessing in disguise. And Thomas Meyer-Harding certainly can attest, being a frequent visitor of Moldova, the quality of wine significantly improved after the Russian embargo. Before the Russian embargo, we produced a lot of it. And let's be honest, some of it, especially that we were selling to Russia, was not exactly top-notch because they were buying it anyway. After that market was closed, you could not compete with that wine in Europe or elsewhere. So in the last 10 years or more, we have new boutique wineries with hotels, with restaurants, and actually one of them is a little bit more famous than others, having hosted the European Political Community Summit with 44 heads of states from Europe. So I'm not quite ready to thank Putin for the energy crisis just yet, but for the wine embargo, certainly.
So probably this is also another item on the list that we can mention when talking about shared determination, shared experiences between Austria and Moldova. Not only that June is a very decisive month, but also, of course, our love for wine. Against all odds, you mentioned at the beginning, and also against all odds, and despite the fact that you were constantly over the last couple of years under the hybrid influence of Russia, despite the fact of the energy crisis that you mentioned, of the stolen money that you mentioned, the population managed to build up some sort of resilience. And resilience is often mentioned when we're also looking at Moldova from a Central European perspective, also here in Austria, resilience against those sort of hybrid influence, cyber attacks, but disinformation campaigns, of course, as well. What is your takeaway? What can other European member states learn from that experience of strengthening resilience within the civil society and the communities?
Well, first and foremost, it is in the best interest of our partners in the free world to help us when it comes to combating Russian propaganda and Russian hybrid tactics in Moldova, because we are a petri dish of Russian hybrid tactics. And if they see that they are successful in Moldova, they're going to take them on the road in the next election. In Austria, in Germany, in France, in the United States. So it's in everybody's interest that we can put up strong defenses in Moldova and unravel and debunk all these attempts to undermine us because we are sort of the first line of defense, so that they don't take these tactics elsewhere. And we are improving. This strategic communication center that we're building now will hopefully in the near future we'll be able to share experiences with our partners in how we're able to resist. But the sheer fact that we've been under this avalanche of Russian propaganda and all sorts of Russian interference for so many years has built this resistance in many ways. And Moldovans have learned to realize that when you have a war in Ukraine in the scale that hasn't been seen since the Second World War, it's a lot more difficult for the Russians to paint this picture that they were promoting, this rosy idea of the Russian world. Many Moldovans, even those that were feeling some leniency towards the Russians before the war, having seen the horrors of the so-called Russian world in Bucha, in Irpin, in Mariupol, in Kharkiv, a lot fewer now are looking at the Russian world as something that is at all meaningful. And even in the Transnistrian region, and even in Gagauzia, despite the efforts of the Russians to bribe the electorate. And this is a challenge. This is one of the biggest challenges that we faced. And no matter where you are, no matter how astute and charismatic of a politician you are, when you are talking to a voter and you are telling him or her the benefits from this or that policy, when he or she has an alternative of getting 100 euros in an envelope, and 100 euros is a minimum pension in Moldova, that's a very, very tough offer to resist. And the Russians are betting on that. So the important part is for us to be able to build our economic resilience so that people don't succumb to this very, very difficult choice of taking a bribe and selling out their vote, and by extension undermining the future of their citizens, of their children, in exchange for these 100 euros that make a difference for many of them. So we'll continue to work hard to build our defenses, also in cyber. We're working hard now to make sure that we have ironclad protection for our electoral process, because we've seen Russians trying to interfere in elections and counting votes. That is a priority for us now, and we'll be working hard in mobilizing our citizens inside the country, in the diaspora, because this chance that we have now with the referendum and the EU accession process, it's a chance that we have missed in the 90s, we have missed in the 2000s, and we now have this chance that we simply cannot afford to miss. And our citizens are aware of that, but we have to work hard to make sure that that message resonates and that message motivates them to turn out and participate in October.
Mm-hmm. We have mentioned a couple of times Transnistria, we have mentioned Gagauzia. Looking into the future, looking into the next 6 months, 12 months, if the lights of the accession process turn also green in that upcoming months, now with the 25th of June, but especially also the 20th of October, if all goes as planned and we can be optimistic, how do you see these regions, especially Transnistria? Will there be an EU accession for the entire territory of Moldova?
If everything goes as planned, yes, but in Moldova, you're well aware, everything always goes as planned. We'll do our utmost to make sure that in the accession process, our citizens in the Transnistrian region can benefit fully from all the opportunities that the European accession process entails, that the accession to a single market provides. And we're encouraged by the previous experience when we were negotiating the DCFTA. The Transnistrian business interests were very keen to have their interests represented in the final document that Moldova has signed and we are all now implementing, that allows Moldova to export about 67% of everything we produce to the European Union, and the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova to export over 70% of everything they produce to the European Union. So there is a very strong incentive there and very strong leverage by virtue of this very strong anchoring, economic anchoring by the business community there onto the European market, that we are confident that they will be more than eager to be part of this accession discussions. Of course, we are the interface that talks to Brussels, that negotiates with Brussels, but we will be very open to make sure that the economic entities and whatever downloading of European technical standards also takes place in the Transnistrian region of the Republic of Moldova, so that every citizen of Moldova can benefit from these opportunities that stand before us. So again, there is cautious optimism here, not so much on the Russian military presence. That is a bit more difficult, as Thomas can attest to. But there is also opportunities when it comes to future discussions whenever the conclusion of hostilities in Ukraine will take place. Our friends in Kiev are open to also discuss the Transnistrian issue so that they don't end up with this prolonged disturbance behind their back and this continuous vulnerability. So there is also potential there, but as long as economically we're firmly anchored and as long as we move onto the European path, this creates positive momentum also for the reintegration process.
Allow me to ask one more follow-up question regarding Transnistria concretely. The Transnistrian Congressional Assembly just recently requested Russian support against, quote, an increasing pressure from Moldova on Transnistria. If we look now, the aftermath of the 20th of October, if everything, as you mentioned, goes as planned, and the people of Moldova vote with a large majority for the EU accession, for the referendum, for the continuation of President Sandu, do you see that within Transnistria there might be some sort of threat that they might be seeking some sort of annexation from Russia?
Well, I should make a small correction to the quote. They asked for Russian diplomatic support, because the first draft of their statement said exactly like you quoted it, but then in about an hour they had to come up and edit that statement, because even they figured out asking for Russian support would be too risky and could be misinterpreted. So they asked for Russian diplomatic support. Okay. And before that, there was this gathering of so-called people's deputies, but nothing really came out of that. They didn't ask for any annexation, they didn't ask for independence, because they are aware, at the end of the day, of the repercussions that could entail. And the fact that the folks that are calling the shots in the Transnistrian region are on the ground there, they understand the repercussions. And having seen the horrors in Ukraine, if they are at all reasonable and if they at all have any desire to maintain the community intact, that they would not venture into inviting the Russian world, because we are all clear what that entails. So things have remained calm in the Transnistrian region, and we are firmly committed in maintaining that the case. We are firmly committed to a peaceful resolution of the conflict there, because frankly there isn't really much of a conflict. When you talk to people, people on both banks of the Dniester, they don't really have a conflict among themselves. It's an artificial construct created in the early 90s by the Kremlin to deny Moldova its capacity to exercise its sovereignty. And since then, they've executed on that plan, unfortunately. Despite the commitment and the international obligation under the OSCE summit in 1999 to withdraw the troops and munition, they still failed to do that. But we'll continue to work with our international partners to create the circumstances for them to do so. But in the Transnistrian region, things are calm, despite from time to time they're trying to create some small disturbances, but nobody has an interest in any escalation or any thing that would cause any difficulty to our citizens, because at the end of the day, over 95% of citizens in the Transnistria region are Moldovan citizens. So we cannot afford to make their life more difficult than the Russians are already making it. Because the Kremlin and Putin doesn't care about the residents of Transnistria, much like it doesn't care about Russian speakers in Kharkov or in Odessa or in Mariupol. We care about our citizens. And we'll make every effort to make sure that we provide every opportunity and every benefit from the EU accession and maintain the stability and the peace in the entire Republic of Moldova, including the Transnistrian region.
When we were talking about EU accession, EU enlargement within Central Europe, within Western Europe over the last 10, 15 years, was always, or many times, associated with the term fatigue, enlargement fatigue, especially because we all know the enlargement stalemate in the Western Balkan region. And therefore, my question would be to you, if you could give a couple of recommendations to the EU institutions, but also to your own government in a self-critical way, what would be the best strategy to avoid a Balkan trap when it comes to Moldova's accession?
Well, there is no recipe other than delivering on the reforms, making sure that there is no democratic backsliding, there is full living up to the commitments that you make, and fatigue is more of a external effort. For the members in the Balkans, it's more about disillusionment about the lengthy process, but about the fatigue with the enlargement within the EU. I mean, that's a difficult concept in the context of Ukraine, because when you hear about fatigue in Europe in the context of enlargement and where Ukraine is also a candidate, as long as Ukraine is not fatigued in defending itself and defending Europe, it's almost cynical to talk about fatigue in, I don't know, Paris, Berlin, Vienna. If the men and women on the front line in Ukraine are not fatigued, then we certainly cannot afford to pretend to be fatigued. Whatever costs there are, they are insurmountably smaller than if we fail to live up to our principles and defend internationally recognized borders. Because if Ukraine, God forbid, fails, or if it were to fail, like some predicted in 3 days, Moldova was clearly next, and then it is anybody's guess. In a moment of weakness for NATO, the Baltic countries, it's anybody's guess what would happen next. And you don't have to have a PhD in history or political science to know that aggressors and bullies are emboldened by signs of weakness. So enlargement clearly shows that the values are there. The support for Ukraine now that we've seen, albeit a little late from the US Congress, is also there. Now the G7 decision this week is also having this clear long-term commitment, the long-term buy-in that is supposed to indicate the Kremlin that the Western world, the free world, is serious about defending the international rule-based order. And we can only hope, because in Moldova, hope often is the main strategy. Sometimes it's the best thing we have. But that has worked well for us. We've been hopeful, and we've worked hard to be able to capitalize on the opportunities when they arise.
So you do expect that also the European institutions, that the capitals will also deliver on the promise and on the expectation they're now giving to Moldova and to Ukraine?
I very much appreciate, even though it was perceived by some as somewhat ambiguous, But I personally appreciate this concept that the EU put forward, and Commissioner Hahn, more for more. It's only fair. And of course, the corollary that comes with that, which is not spelled out, but it's can be read between the lines, less for less. It's only fair. And we expect that our partners will reciprocate as long as we make the hard effort in delivering on our commitments, that will be reciprocated. We don't ask for any special treatment. We ask for the commitments that we make, the agreements that we convene. If we live up to those commitments, then we proceed further. Of course, there is this broader discussion that is sort of beyond my pay grade, as American friends say, when it comes to the decision-making process in the European Union, the unanimity versus qualified majority. That's a difficult discussion to be had, and we understand that. But at the same time, we expect that the principle that has been spelled out and the process that has been there for quite some time now, we all live up to those promises and those expectations.
I have one last question also on my agenda before we will also give our audience the chance to ask 1 or 2 questions. And of course, it comes again from a think tank perspective and picking on your analytical academic brain. We have mentioned that you have recently also published your PhD thesis on Europeanization versus democratization in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. And you have made this conceptual distinction, you've briefly mentioned it yourself, between democratization and Europeanization. And I suppose if I read these concluding remarks correctly, you said that an increasing Europeanization while becoming less democratic in the absence of tangible membership perspectives will lead to no political commitment, no real willingness for political reforms that would, however, be very necessary also in the case of Moldova. Now, of course, recently we have seen those absence of membership perspectives changed. We have now, as mentioned, concrete perspectives for Moldova to reach that membership within the next couple of years. We have elaborated on those potential and perspectives. So with these recent changes in EU perspectives, do you see also within the current government, from a very self-critical perspective, from a very self-critical assessment, these necessary reforms being made?
Well, certainly. We try to, first and foremost, live up to the expectation of our citizens. And the reforms, we started them before having clear expectation or hope of actually getting a membership perspective. This was the foundation of our political agenda. And the primary consideration is making the reforms for the sake of Moldovan citizens. If it helps us to accede to the European Union, it's only better. But the underlying thesis in my dissertation was that during the time of the oligarchic system in Moldova and in some other countries that shall go unnamed, the democratization is a facade democratization. It's a Potemkin democratization, where there is a pretense of democratization, but behind the facade is very much the same old corruption, the same old anti-democratic system, and that's where the disconnect was. Because normally, Europeanization and democratization, they should be to some degree synonyms, because it's democratization is Europeanization encompasses democratization. It's sort of indigenous. But in contexts like Moldova before, when Plahotniuc was in power and before that, there was sort of this veil of Europeanization, especially on the economic front, but on the political front, there was very little of actual democratic reforms in line with European aspirations. Mm-hmm. Now, in Moldova, we've sort of maybe not quite finished breaking this mold and breaking this disconnect, but we've certainly made significant inroads in actually having Europeanization and democratization being more synonymous rather than antonyms. That was sort of the gist that I was referring to. And we'll continue to work hard. There is no end in sight to positive improvements that you can make in a democracy when it comes to rule of law, combating corruption. There is plenty of work to do even in some of the countries in the top of the rankings of Transparency International or Bertelsmann Stiftung Democracy Index. And we remain committed to doing this hard work. And yes, we are happy that now we have this light at the end of the tunnel with the EU accession. Hopefully it's not the train coming from the other side. We hope that it's a real positive outcome, and we'll certainly work hard to make it so.
Excellent. And we will continue also to support this effort. And now I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have some time for questions from the audience. If I can just ask everyone who is going to ask a question to be brief and very concrete, that would be much appreciated, so we can also have the possibility for several questions. Please.
Yeah. So my name is Jun Saito. At first, thank you very much for your quite precise presentation. And my question is, first of all, do you think the EU membership of Moldova is a guarantee enough for Moldavian security? And the second question is, if the conflict in Transnistria is not solved in the long run, would be the EU membership similar with Cyprus a solution for Moldova? Thank you very much.
Well, these are two very difficult questions. I'll try to be brief. On the security, of course, EU is not a guarantee of security the way NATO is. There is no discussion there. In Moldova, there is not enough democratic support for NATO membership. Because of Russian propaganda, it's a long story. We are now trying to open up the discussion about alternatives to Moldovan security, but we need to give time to our citizens to wean off this Russian propaganda, because the Russians have been very instrumental in cementing this notion in many Moldovan minds that neutrality is a guarantee of security. In the context of Moldova, that's very difficult sell to make. When you have a war nearby, when you have a Russian military presence despite our will, that's for Austria, maybe. I'm not to judge. For Switzerland, certainly. For Moldova, not so much. But that is a very soothing idea for many Moldovan citizens, because you don't need to spend on security, you are small, nobody's going to attack you, you are not causing trouble to anyone. Well, now, with the war ravaging near door, that's a much more difficult case to make. We are working to open up this public discussion. In 2 weeks, I'll be attending hopefully going to Washington for the NATO summit. We try to explore all alternatives. Of course, this is something that is for more long term, because currently only about a quarter, maybe a third, if we are optimistic, of Moldovans support NATO membership. So we are encouraged by the discussions that are happening now in Brussels about stronger consolidated cooperation in the EU on the defense. And we certainly want to be part of those discussions as a candidate country to be part of the logistics lines of this further integration when it comes to security and defense. On the Transnistrian region and the Cyprus precedent, well, some of our friends in Brussels are telling us that Cyprus precedent stands, although we cannot expect and build our policy on that. We cannot rely on being able to accede as a full member with the conflict not being solved. But if our partners in Brussels would make it a precondition, then that would provide the Kremlin leverage. So we are thankful and we are encouraged by our friends in Brussels not making this a precondition, quite to the contrary, saying that, yes, perhaps there is the Cyprus precedent, and potentially there is also an opportunity of joining without necessarily having the conflict solved. But we don't count of it, certainly. We will work hard to make sure that we use all the avenues and all the incentives that come from the accession process to draw the Transnistrian region in with positive economic incentives. And there are already positive developments. From the beginning of the year, they are starting to pay customs tax in Moldova for the first time in 30 years. And step by step, we're going to provide more services in exchange for payment like any other region of Moldova does. But it needs to be step by step so that it doesn't create undue stress to our citizens.
Please.
Thanks a lot. Congratulations, Minister, for starting the EU negotiations. That's really a big achievement. About NATO, this question was already asked. That would have been my natural question, but I want to ask you about Kosovo and the recognition of Moldova, of the Republic of Kosovo, as a litmus test for Europeanness and your courage and your design to devotion to the West. Thanks a lot.
Well, I'm not sure I quite buy the framing. Given our circumstances, I would disagree that it's a lack of courage or any European allegiance by not taking that step. We have our challenging circumstances, and there are a number of other EU member states that haven't done so. So we will respectfully take our time. We have good cooperation and great respect for our friends in Kosovo. We have good political cooperation with them, and we welcomed the president of Kosovo at the European Political Community Summit that we hosted in Moldova, but the formal decision on recognition will have to take it slow.
No? No? Okay, then we move on here.
Thanks for a very good presentation. As a former vice president of ABC Television, I'm interested in your disinformation center and how far along it is. I think it was announced at least a year ago. And I'm curious to know if you're going to use assistance from EU, US, or where the experts are coming from. And will part of it be trying to educate your citizens, your voters, about media literacy, disinformation, and that kind of thing as well? Thanks very much.
Certainly. The long-term effort is, of course, educating our citizens to be able to discern what is propaganda, what is disinformation. But in the short term, this entity will navigate the online sphere and trying to identify these malign influences and trying to remedy them, but also help us building counter-narratives. Because in a propaganda war, more often than not, you cannot, in a democratic setting, cut it off completely. So the best chance you have is to have an open debate and try to combat these narratives with narratives of your own, honest, factual-based, that would hopefully resonate with citizens. And those are the capacities that we are building at this center with the help of our partners from the EU, from the US. Certainly we have the support in place. It's just a matter of finishing this building process to have the capacity in place to deliver on the mandate of this center. It's a work in progress. We're building it based on the experience of some of our friends in the Baltics, adjusting it to our reality, and hopefully in the near future we'll be able to share experiences with other partners.
Mr. Grauenberg, please.
Grauenberg, former commercial councillor for the region, also Moldova wants responsibility. It's great you got rid of the dependence on the gas from Russia. What about electricity? You mentioned some connections to the Western grid, but I think the main production is still in Transnistria for electricity and heat for Chisinau. So I just wonder what will be in the future. And then you mentioned diaspora, and the diaspora is enormous. And a lot of workforce, Moldovan is working somewhere else. So how do you cope with it? And are you concentrating in some areas like IT? Thank you.
We do. We have a booming IT sector, and we actually have some Austrian investors in our IT sector. And one of the main challenges is actually lack of labor, lack of people, because once they get some experience. Many of them leave for Europe and elsewhere. But we're also working hard now to create conditions and create incentives for at least some of our fellow citizens from the diaspora to come back home and help the country. It's a tough sell in the current circumstances, as you can imagine, but we will not be deterred. We'll work hard, and I will continue to make this plea after we conclude our meeting here with the meeting with Moldovan diaspora here in Vienna. With the electricity, we are building the high voltage line, one of them. We'll need another one in the north and then perhaps another one in the center to be fully integrated into the European energy grid, so we no longer depend at all on the power generation in the Transnistrian region, so that we can buy all of our electricity from the European Union. We have about 20% generation capacity domestically. We want to grow that capacity by having green energy, by also reducing our consumption by insulating public buildings. So we have all these big projects running now. But the main project is to have this big interconnectedness with the European Union. And then we will be completely disconnected from our dependency on Russia and the extension, the production in the Transnistrian region. So there is significant progress being made, and on gas I mentioned that we've already achieved total independence, and we can buy gas. Just the other day we bought gas on the international market, and it was cheaper than what our contract with Gazprom would have provided. So choice matters, and choice makes a difference.
So there's more efforts also in diversifying your energy supplies for the future as well.
Sure.
Yeah. There's a question here, and then Lawrence Kettle. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, I didn't see that you have a question too, but please. Yeah. We can also then collect 2 or 3 questions, maybe.
Oh, Lawrence Kettle. I'm with the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. Thank you, Deputy Prime Minister. I just wanted to, a lot of my questions that I previously had already got answered or have already been answered by you. So but I do have one regarding Transnistria. You said the differences between you and, Moldova and the Transnistrian region was a creation by the Kremlin to deny Moldova its ability to exercise its sovereignty. Rather a controversial question. Do you argue the same? Could that be also applied to your neutrality? Because neutrality was imposed on you by...
The answer is yes.
Wow, that was a quick response. Because it was imposed on you constitutionally by the Russians in order to gain it. And so with the war in Ukraine, has there been a shift, not necessarily of the public to join NATO, of course, but has there been a shift regarding maybe we should rethink the constitutional position of neutrality? And before you ask if I also think the same thing applied to Austria about was it limiting its sovereignty, yes, in my personal opinion, it was.
Well, you're perfectly right. In the early 90s, the neutrality status was imposed on us, and Moldovan elites back then were hopeful, maybe a bit naive, that would shame the Russians into withdrawing the military presence and the munitions. But needless to say, that didn't happen. And the Kremlin since then has made almost a fetish out of Moldovan neutrality, being the biggest, pretty much the only promoters of Moldova's neutrality, while being also the only ones that have been consistently violating this neutrality by maintaining troops and munitions in Moldova. That doesn't make a lot of sense, but then if you are aware of the situation in Eastern Europe and Russia's modus operandi, then it makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, even the horror that the Kremlin is causing in Ukraine has not shifted enough the perceptions in Moldova. Even more so, in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, from about 25% support for NATO, it jumped to about 35%. And then the next year, it went back to about 27. But Moldovans can be excused, because the same is probably true about the whole of Europe. Because I remember myself, my first participation in the Council of Europe as a new member of parliament in 2019 in summer, when Russia was welcomed back into the Council of Europe after 5 years of the annexation of Crimea. A slap on the wrist, kept in the doghouse for 5 years, and then business as usual, forget and forgive. If that's not appeasement, I don't know what is. And when it comes to Moldova's neutrality, it's a difficult discussion. It will take us time to have this long, difficult public discussion in Moldova, because the wall of propaganda is so thick that it will take us time to persuade enough citizens to change their mind. And maybe they won't. I mean, I cannot predict the outcome of this long debate. We could end up after 10 years of this very robust discussion, and majority of Moldovans will still consider that neutrality is the solution for security. And even though I would disagree, I would have to accept the democratic position of the majority of Moldovan citizens.
The lady in the second row, sorry, I didn't see you before.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask this question also. As you said, it's quite naive. I was thinking also to make a diplomatic solution like Georgia, Ukraine, and Moldavia to be neutral and to have it like a buffer zone between West and East, and to make peace. And I wanted to ask you actually, in your opinion, political or analytic, has Georgia the same situation like your country?
Well, I'm no longer an analyst. I'm a member of the cabinet. So to comment on the political situation, domestic affairs of a friendly country, it's a difficult situation to be in. Certainly, when it comes to the situation of Moldova, we will do our utmost to make sure that we discuss it with our citizens, but it's ultimately up to the citizens to decide, and we are not in a position to make recommendations about other countries. If I were more in a analyst circumstance, I would perhaps be more willing to venture into more assessments.
Mr. Fasslabend, I think you also have a question.
We have talked now about Ukraine, even Georgia, Transnistria. My question would be, how is the relationship between Moldova and Romania?
Great. It's never been better, and I mean, honestly. But just a small caveat to the previous question regarding neutrality and Ukraine. I mean, we all remember that Ukraine, before the Russian invasion, was a pretty much de facto neutral country. It was a non-aligned, non-member, the Budapest Memorandum, yeah? Didn't stop the Russians. And the claim about NATO, after Sweden and Finland joined, isn't that point mute? I mean, if it ever needed to be muted, because few were buying it other than Russian propagandists, and I'm sure even they weren't buying it. So it's clear that the narrative that they are promoting had nothing to do with reality. But when it comes to Romania, our relationships are truly the strongest that they've ever been. Our partnership and our cooperation at all levels. And I mean, we were talking earlier about EU accession. I'm a full-fledged EU citizen. I'm a citizen of Romania. President Sandu is a full-fledged European citizen. More than half of Moldovans at home, and certainly a lot more than half of Moldovan diaspora are European citizens. I remember when we were applying for the EU, the questionnaire that we had to fill, there was some very curious questions there, including the nationality and the ethnicity of members of parliament, which I found quite strange. But we were happy to oblige. We ran I was the faction leader in parliament back then, and we ran the numbers, and it turned out from the 63 members of parliament from the faction of the party that I had the honor of leading in parliament, I believe 56 were members, or certainly more than 50. But we are not quite representative of the Moldovan population. We represent more the pro-European electorate. So that's where, and the pro-Romanian voters were, the majority are Romanian citizens and full-fledged citizens of the European Union. And there are even some Romanian citizens in the pro-Russian opposition.
Minister POPεπτOI, thank you so much for speaking with us today, for elaborating the path towards EU accession, the challenges, but especially the opportunities. I suppose that we have all now a more clear but also more optimistic outlook, and we will certainly follow the developments in Moldova very closely, not only but especially from a think tank, from an analytical point of view. We do wish you already now all the best for the 20th of October, and thank you very much for being with us and for taking the time to speak to us today. It was really a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.